Hello, Professor Kent Lee here. Welcome back to this video series where we are looking at genres and understanding your field of study and the academic writing in your field. So all of this is going to eventually tie together, but today I want to ask you some questions and make you think more about your field of study. If you're listening to this video, maybe you're an English major and maybe you're focusing on literature or linguistics or cultural studies or international business English. Maybe you're from another field, social science, engineering, science field, or whatever field you're in. I want you to think about your field and better understand what your field is about, because that really affects the way you do academic writing and research writing in your field. So, for example, when you write papers, what kind of arguments do you make? What kind of support do you provide for your arguments in the papers you write in your field? It depends on the nature of your field. And it's important to understand that and how it compares to other fields. Let me give you some examples from my own experience. I remember in college I majored in German. My dream was going to graduate school to do linguistics for my master's and PhD, although I later changed my PhD course. After college, before I got into graduate school, I was doing some working, and a coworker said, "You're studying linguistics? What's the value of that? What's the value of that?" And I was kind of bothered by her attitude, and I couldn't really defend it. I couldn't really explain what linguistics is. I was a newbie, that is a new person to the field, or a more technical term is a neophyte, a beginner, a new person, or in slang, a newbie. So I couldn't really respond to that. What's the social value of linguistics? Why should we have linguistics? Why should people care about it? Later on, as I was in grad school, in the beginning stage of my program in linguistics, I might have mentioned this before. I was chatting with a stranger at a bus station, and he asked me, "What do you study?" "Oh, linguistics." It's like, "Oh, like French and stuff?" I'm like, "No. It's language, human language." "Oh, like French and stuff?" I didn't know enough about the field to explain to a normal person what linguistics was. I didn't understand it well enough. Later, of course, I got a good understanding of what it's about, the goals, the theories, and such, and the questions that drive the field. And then I decided to go to educational psychology for my PhD, because I knew a lot of people who went there to do work on linguistics, especially applied linguistics, which was what I was interested in at the time. And I saw a really crazy field. What is this department? Educational psychology. It was a huge department. And there were people doing all kinds of things. And I couldn't figure out what this department was. It's actually really a cluster of different fields. And it's a hugely broad area, because there were people doing research on applied linguistics and language education, areas of linguistics like discourse analysis and teaching pronunciation, people doing research on aging and cognition and developmental psychology, like with children and school children, and things like school bullying, and then test research, like statistics for developing language tests and stuff. People doing psycholinguistics and cognitive and psychological stuff related to language or cognition. I couldn't figure out what this department was. It's like this mash of all kinds of different things together. Eventually I realized it's really applications of psychology, or just about anything, to education, anything relevant to education, linguistics, psychology, sociology, etc. And so it was a huge interdisciplinary field, and so it took me quite a while to figure out what this department was about, and it's really a mash of many different subfields, a hugely broad area. So it is helpful to think about your major, because that affects the kind of research writing you do. I, for example, went from a background in more theoretical linguistics to writing a paper for a professor whose background in educational psychology was very different, and I had a hard time because her expectations were really different from what I was used to in terms of writing a paper and doing research. So I want you to think about your field, because that affects how you write. Whether it's just a college paper or something you do in graduate school research and writing. So imagine explaining to yourself and then explaining to other people. Explaining to other people, like your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, your husband, your parents who might be paying for your education, your relatives. Asking, you studying that? What's the value of that? What kind of job are you going to get with that? And even in a job interview, because most of you might end up getting a job that's not directly related to your major. You have to answer that in a job interview question. Think about your field. What is it about? What do people do in the field and why? What do they want to find out? What are the driving questions in the field? Why do you personally want to study it? What attracted you to the field? What's your motivation, your interests, your goals as a student studying in that field? What are some important concepts and ideas in the field, or important questions that drive the field? Think about your professors. What kind of work do they do? What kind of research do they do? Or what do you think they do? When you graduate from your current program, do you want to continue working and studying in that field, or switch to something else? Your field, why is it valuable or important for society? Why should universities have that kind of department, that kind of field, and why should people care? And especially if it's a humanities field, what's the value of that? What's the value of a humanities program? Imagine you're explaining these things to yourself, then explaining them to your family members, to your friends, your boyfriend, girlfriend. Maybe someday explaining it to a younger person in your department, in your current academic program, who asks you for help with their classes. What would you say? This is something that takes quite a while to think about, and it's probably hard to do unless you're at least a third or fourth year student in a college program, or a master's student who's been in the program for a little while. Like, for example, linguistics. Linguistics is a really broad field, and there are different areas of linguistics that are asking different questions. Because they ask different questions, they have different approaches to the research that they do. And because some of them are going to focus more on social aspects of language, or cognitive aspects of language, or language as its own self-contained mental system that's different from everything else up here in the head, that's something that you're born with, and there's this universal grammar or language principles that people are born with that's really distinct from other stuff in the mind. There are different questions that people ask, and because they ask different kinds of questions, they are going to study them differently. Different kinds of qualitative or quantitative research, or other kinds of research. And because of that, their research is going to look very different, and then the way they write about it is going to be very different. How does it affect the way that you do writing? For example, in your literature class, in your sociolinguistics class, in your theoretical linguistics class, in a cognitive or psycholinguistics class, or a psychology class, what are the questions? Importantly, how do you answer the questions? How do you answer the questions? What kind of research do you do, or what kind of research do the scholars or researchers or scientists in the field do in order to answer those questions? That entails an idea of what is knowledge in the field, and how do you gain new knowledge? How do you find new things or new ideas in the field? How does the field progress? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later. And thus, how do you write up research papers? Or if it's just a college class and you're digesting ideas from other scholars or researchers in the field, and that's going to affect the way you write your own paper, even though you're not, writing an original research paper where you prove a hypothesis and you do experiments. You're synthesizing and analyzing ideas from other scholars or researchers in the field. That in turn affects the kinds of questions you're asking in your paper, how you structure your paper, and how you develop support for your main ideas in the body paragraphs of your paper, what kind of evidence, what counts as evidence that you put in your papers to support your arguments or your thesis statements and your topic sentences. and thus how you craft the whole paper, the organization of the whole paper, the support in the body paragraphs, and how you present and develop ideas and arguments in your paper. That's all shaped by these kind of very general philosophical questions. So we're going to get philosophical. I've been in some of these videos, I'm getting kind of scientific, and I'm also going to get philosophical in some of these videos because it's important to understand your field. Philosophy of science is kind of what we're doing, which applies really not just to science, but to anything that you're studying. Kind of philosophy of knowledge and how you find new things. So at the end of this video, think about these questions. How would you explain your field to someone else? What do people do? Why do they do it? And then what kind of research work do people do in the field? And then how do you write about that research? Whether you're doing original research or you're writing a paper on the topic in your college class, how do you write your paper? And the questions I've mentioned in this video, I want you to think about it before you go on to like a further video in this series. Think about these questions. Think then how this affects writing in the field. What academic papers, college papers, graduate school papers, research articles look like in the field, and the contents of those papers and articles. Think about that. Prepare to be stretched mentally as you do. And in the next videos, we're going to get more into research methods and philosophical questions about academic fields. So again, your brain is probably a little bit full, or will be after you think about these. And after you rest for a while, come back to the next video. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.